Hello! Welcome to the second installment out of 3 where I go over 2 Trench Crusade Warbands that are based on sets that you can get from the Kickstarter/backer kit linked below. These are all built at the 700 ducat cost threshold for the purpose of being an entry to campaign play, but should be easy enough to scale up to the 900 ducat skirmish variants if one so chooses. Today, we're focusing on the Iron Sultanate and the Cult of the Black Grail. In the last video, I discussed the specific numbers involved behind general decision making and the rules of the game. So check that out if you're looking for more context, but here we're just going to jump right into the warbands. Now onto the Iron Sultanate, the human faction I actually play and bought models for. In brief, the name of the game for these guys is Alchemical Ammunition. Whereas in the Heretic Legion, we were able to get a +1 on our grunts range attacks for the cost of 10 ducats, in the Iron Sultanate we can accomplish this for 3 ducats on a cheaper unit with a cheaper gun. Which is why it's cruel that the default warband for this faction actually features fewer grunts than the previous 2 factions we've already discussed. This only includes 4 Azebs, whereas a quite viable option for fire support is an army of these dudes who can reliably hit their targets, 80% at close range, 57% at long, just, pelting your opponents to death with sheer volume of bullets. This faction has a lot of tricks up its sleeve, and the default warband only really lets you have a taste of what you can do, especially with the variants. But that's a topic for a different time, so here we're going to look at what we can do with what we have. One severe weakness of this army is that their grunts, the Azebs, are much less adaptable in both stat line and equipment options, and completely crumple in melee, so positioning is very important for this faction. Lack of assault weapon options is also pretty prevalent, so unless you're taking the halberd gun, your units are far more divided into melee and range units than most other factions. This warband wants you to be annoying with your grunts who can constantly apply blood markers, but also because they hit so consistently can actually secure kills by themselves pretty decently. Meanwhile, the rest of your group is split between keeping enemies off the Azebs and seeking out elites who your Azebs can't deal with by themselves. The warband consists of 1 Yabazi captain, 1 Jabirian alchemist, 1 sapper, 1 line of Jabir, and 4 Azebs. Let's start with talking about the grunts this time. The Azebs here are defined by their unique equipment in the warband this time since, as previously mentioned, this faction has a lot more unique items than the last 2 warbands. First of all is the mighty Grail at 7 ducats. This on paper is just a worse bolt-action rifle. You're sacrificing 6 inches of range for 3 ducats of savings, which in my opinion is not worth it at all. But this rifle can be loaded with the faction's most cost-effective item, the alchemical ammunition. For 3 ducats, bringing the total rifle and ammo cost up to the same price as a bolt-action rifle, we get a +1 to hit at ranges up to 9 inches and flat neutral on ranges up to 18 inches. Compared to the bolt-action rifle, which will have flat neutral up to 12 inches and -1 up to 24. So, we of course still have overall shorter range, but between 18 to 12 inches, the Grail will be hitting almost twice as often, 58% versus 31%, and from 9 inches and below, we'll see a 22% increase in hit chance. These facts alone will make your Azebs frankly feel much better to use, as there's no range their guns can reach that they have less than a 50% chance of hitting. We also take the Skirmisher ability for all our Azebs, as their close range gun means that they will of course be closer and thus more charge susceptible. This allows the Azebs to retreat when threatened by a charge D3 inches, which, if you're paying attention to distances, can really mess up charging units. Notably, you can go down to 9 inches to get the higher hit rate, and then your opponent will need to charge with whatever extra amount you rolled to reach, which at a maximum means you're now at 12 inches, requiring a maximum roll of your opponents. It's 33% chance of you getting your maximum roll, while it's 16% chance for them. This is of course assuming you have already moved that turn. If not, you can retreat even further, mandating the need for a dash as the first action from your opponent, which, depending on the unit, can have a solid chance of just ending their turn outright. Also, frankly, their melee is so bad that it's probably better to just try to disengage if in melee, as we've given them armor to help avoid going down. And even if a blood marker is acquired, you'll be in short range from the counterfire, meaning you're less crippled if your opponent decides to use them. 2 have been given medkits, as they're usually close enough to each other or to other units and don't need to use risky actions very often, that being able to keep their accuracy up throughout the fight is appreciated. The Sapper is your other very annoying unit, who pairs very well with the Azebs, helping them establish deterrence against being charged haphazardly. They're equipped with a unit-specific Aliabozan, which is a 12-inch gun with the shrapnel keyword, and importantly takes alchemical ammunition, meaning with the natural +1 unit stat, this gun should be hitting and stacking blood markers very consistently, with 90% hit chance at close range and 80% at long. They can also wield a shield with it, making the unit able to have a -2 armor for only 30 ducats. The unique features of this guy involve starting closer to the midline of the map and being able to mine terrain that they are touching, which can add a real threat both physically and psychologically to your opponent. Since the mine is a guaranteed hit, your opponent has to weigh the threat of instant death just to close distance. The mine having shrapnel means that, assuming no helmet of course, multiple blood markers can be applied, making the threat of the mine quite serious. Now there's a caveat of, due to everything this unit has relying on shrapnel for maximum efficiency, if your opponent has shelled out the spare ducats for helmets, his effectiveness goes down a large amount. The mine is still very useful, but it has a lot less bite than it normally would. He can of course also heal with his medkit, which helps as he is sort of the Azeb's front line, and if the enemy isn't in range, is a good use of a turn. The line of Jabir is our high agility unit. With enhanced movement and +1 dice to movement actions, it can take unconventional routes and slam into targets that have been weakened by your ranged support. Two elements of note here. The artificial body modifier makes him very difficult to kill outright. As with standard armor, this means that we're looking at 5% odds of dying and only 20% odds of going down. So he's tanky for an agility unit, and the mauling ability means that he keeps opponents down, which is huge as it allows for bloodbaths and the roll debuffs to not disappear on the immediate subsequent activation. It means you can target units that haven't moved yet with down and still be useful. Nothing else much to say besides don't rely on him solely to be a tank. He is still a unit that shines while moving around, pinning down enemies, etc. Just because he's tanky doesn't mean that is his primary role. The penultimate unit of this warband is the Jurabian Alchemist, who is extremely efficient for its cost. +2 on ranged means he's going to hit with what he's got, and a +1 to melee means he can also be a solid frontliner, especially when equipped with reinforced armor. Only one unique thing about this unit, but it is quite the trait. At the start of battle, you can apply one of the bonus marker keywords, gas, fire, or shrapnel, to all of this alchemist's attacks. Generally, this is useful for countering enemy armies entirely kitted out in helmets, gas masks, or are naturally immune to fire, as you can just use whatever the faction doesn't cover. And with a +1 risky action to change it, you can even reliably target individual unit differences. But also allows for hard countering of factions such as the Black Grail and skew lists that lose a lot of their punch if your opponent has their appropriate elemental counters. Due to this, despite not having strong, I have chosen to give him the Siege Jezzail with alchemical ammunition. That's giving him a significant range with a gun that goes +1 on injury rolls, with the appropriate keyword means that at the very least 2 blood markers are being applied per turn and likely downing opponents. At closer ranges, we have a sword and grenades. The grenades are giving some needed AoE optionality, with, again, will benefit from the keywords, and the sword providing a usable melee chance. He is your big and consistent damage dealer of the faction. Last but certainly not least, the Ubazai Captain, which has the standard leader stat line of +2s in both ranged and melee, tough, but is given a significant trait of Mubarazan, rendering him not only immune to fear, but actually having +1 dice on injury rolls against tough opponents. This makes him your tank slayer. Giving him the halberd gun gives him the option of likely, which is about 95% chance of hitting a target in charging range, and then as it is an assault weapon, charging as follow-up allows them to potentially finish them off in melee with the extra innate dice to injury roll on top of the consumed blood marker. Because he's going to be fighting the toughest units, we've given him the faction-specific Alchemist armor, which acts as reinforced armor, but also makes fire and gas weaponry less effective against him in terms of both reduced injury roll and ignoring the keyword's bonus blood markers. A helmet for good measure insulates this leader from any kind of bonus keyword blood markers. The best use case for this unit is what he's described as, the guy you chuck at the scariest looking thing you can see on the opposing side. The Black Grail is the skew list faction of Trench Crusade as far as I can tell. This faction's trademark is that they are extremely tanky, with even their baseline unit having -1 dice on injury rolls unless you are attacking them with fire, and all of them induce fear, making melee more difficult against them. So your success against this faction is going to depend a lot on how much fire and anti-fear you have available. Playing this faction requires leaning hard into its strengths as it either lives or dies by them. You want to get close and overwhelm your opponent with shambling hordes of very difficult to kill units that are supported by even harder to kill elites. Your ranged options are very limited, but you have potent tools to make your opponent's ranged efforts hell as you close in. The faction has even more gimmicks, with more difficult to pass morale tests, which can insta-win you a game, and unique infection markers that ramp up every turn, making fighting this faction a headache for even well enough equipped teams. I should point out that the warband provided by the Kickstarter aligns more with one of the alternative versions of the faction, but as with the Heretic Legion, we're going to avoid alternative versions for now. The warband features 1 Plague Knight, 2 Corpse Guards, 1 Hound of the Black Grail, and 4 Grail Thralls. Let's begin with the Grail Thralls. For no point cost difference, one can substitute these out with fly thralls, which forego their undead fortitude in favor of flying movement. On certain maps, I can certainly see this being more beneficial, but for now we're going to keep them all as Grail thralls in order to help them survive and hold objectives better since they cannot be equipped. They have terrible stats, with -1 to melee and no equipment options at all, but notably have overwhelming horde, which is where if you have nearby friendly units, they get a +1 melee dice per unit. Meaning if you have all 4 of these thralls huddled together, you get them having a +2 to melee hits for each of them. So these guys are nearly useless unless grouped with other units, so don't let them go out by themselves unless there is no better option at all. Say you need to grab a last second objective or something like that. The Grail Hound is your agility unit of the faction in this warband, similar to the line of Jabir in terms of stat line and tankiness due to it having undead fortitude. Bonuses to dash are appreciated for a unit that needs to be in melee to function, and notably has the ability to not be hindered from going down. This alludes to your desire not to have this unit locked in melee with a singular unit, and instead you want them hopping between units, applying a singular infection marker to each of them, so that they're beginning to ramp up by the time your other slower units get into range, especially the Grail Thralls. The ability to not suffer from down movement effects means that the attack of opportunity from disengaging is significantly less threatening than it is for other units. Fear is of course useful to have on this end as well, as not only is it meaningfully harder to stop this unit when you do hit, it's harder to hit in the first place. We're going to jump now to the Plague Knight, the leader of this faction, although notably different from other leader units in that it does not have any plus dice to ranged attacks, which seems to be the trade-off for having strong, fear, and undead fortitude. Undead fortitude combined with reinforced armor makes killing the Plague Knight with a singular shot very unlikely, which, when supported by even tankier corpse guards, makes killing the unit a Herculean task without specialized equipment. As we can't put equipment on most of the units in this warband, we get to spend a huge amount of points on the Plague Knight and the corpse guards. We have given the Plague Knight Beelzebub's Axe, which has a whopping +2 injury dice on top of causing infection markers, meaning this will be killing very often even without any previous markers applied to enemies. For ranged options, the heaviest gun available to the faction is the Viscera Cannon, which makes up for the Plague Knight's lack of range stat by giving a +2 dice to hit at good range of 24 inches. This weapon allows you to self-harm in order to apply an equal number of infection markers onto the opponent, meaning that hits from this cannon can apply a total of 4 markers per shot on a perfectly healthy unit. And since this decision is after rolling to hit, makes it relatively low risk, especially when we have the corpse guards protecting the Plague Knight from actual killing blows. A helmet helps ignore another keyword that can affect undead units, meaning that your enemies will really need fire to bring this elite unit down. Using this guy either at range or melee is a perfectly fine option. Just make sure, if overcharging the Viscera Cannon, that he sticks near a corpse guard at all times so that your opponent doesn't make use of those new blood markers for killing potential. While I can't use the Black Grail shield at range, when wielding the axe, the shield makes the Plague Knight even more annoying to get rid of, with a -3 to injury value, and on top of that, the shield's ability to have a 58% chance of adding -2 dice to ranged attack rolls makes hitting the unit in the first place very difficult. Last in this warband is the Corpse Guard duo. These guys are insanely tanky. With undead fortitude, reinforced armor, and a shield, killing them with a singular attack is only a 0.5% chance, and downing them is a measly 5%. They have the Bodyguard ability, which allows them to redirect non-blast attacks on models within 1 inch away to them instead, meaning that we can stick one right next to the Plague Knight and for the most part not worry too much about being punished for overuse of the Viscera Cannon's extra damage. Likewise, we can stick the other one in the middle of the Grail Thrall horde to keep them at top condition, or even send it out on its own to try and grab objectives to apply pressure. The Putrid Shotguns give the unit some range while allowing them to keep their shield up. These shotguns make up for their poor range stat of the guards, apply affection markers, and have assault, allowing for follow-up attacks with the plague blades that each of them wields, applying even more infection markers. They are both utilizing Black Grail shields as well, meaning they are even harder to hit at range, as over half the time they'll be applying -2 dice to ranged hits. If you've gone this far, thank you for watching. I will be making follow-up videos that should address the rest of the factions here, but we are cutting this one at this point simply because of length concerns, and I hope to see you there.